you very much for being here.
Yes.
Uh, Hello all. We are another lecture for a very important keynote. Today we are going to receive Jutta Eckstein, and she's great. She wrote a lot of very important books. She's a very important name in the Agile community. And more than that, she helped us a lot in Brazil because at the beginning, when you are having the first encounters, she participated. I think she came twice to Brazil, and
Yes.
it was a great. And more than that, Jutta, she was the one that taught me what is art. I will never forget. We were in a kind of very weird exposition, and I said, "Oh, Jutta, this is not art." And she said, "If it makes you feel any emotion, it is art." I never forget it. So thank you very much. Jutta, please go on. It's on you.
Thank you so much. Wow, I didn't know that this is what I said, whatever I'm saying. So thank you so much for the invitation and for having me. So I will start my screen right now. And I know it's a black screen right now. And you should be able, to see the slides now. Yes. That's good. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So I want to talk to you about company-wide agility with, and now we have a lot of buzzwords beyond budgeting, open space, and sociocracy. And you heard already from Alfredo that I have written quite an amount of books. So these are probably my 4 core ones. And I would like to point out a little bit, and now I have to probably already look at time. So the one here, that's my very first one, and it's actually worldwide the first book on scaling Agile, and I published that in 2004. And of course, nobody was interested in that topic at the moment, at the time I published that. And then I went on, and because the teams I was working with were not only large, but also distributed, and so this one was my next book. Then I moved on and was more looking at the ecosystem of the companies. And these are the other 2 books that you see to your right, which is using retrospectives for organizational change. And the other one is together with Johanna Rothman on cost of delay. However, now today, as you see in the title, I want to talk to you about something else, which is actually my latest book, and that's on company-wide agility. Before I get started, and we'll see how this works, I would like to ask you something, which is, what do you think are the biggest challenges for companies today? And you need to go to menti.com on your phone or your laptop, PC, whatever, and use the code, so menti.com, and then the code 9625839, and you can enter just one word, or you can also put 2 or 3 words together. So theoretically, you can put a whole sentence there, but probably it's better if you capture what you think are the biggest challenges for companies today, like in a word, in a keyword, something that you think like, well, this is what I believe companies are struggling with. And it can be related to the pandemic, so really today in this crisis, but also it can be related just to overall your thoughts. And don't be shy. I don't see anyone replying so far. So I hope you are going there. And so menti.com, and then the code 9625839, and answer. You can also provide several answers. What do you see as the biggest challenges for companies today? And as you see, we have like one answer at least, which is on delivering value is hard, or migrating to remote, which is, well, kind of the thing that people are discussing now. What made digitalization possible? And it was actually Corona and not anything else, no strategy or so. Then we have maintenance of agility, innovation, agility overall, scalability, being visible, hiring people, that's probably related. Oh, communication, I think that is probably an ongoing problem, communication. Tune between teams, so alignment, yeah, I see that. Costs, productivity is what I see. Then another term of scaling, team scalability. And it seems at the moment that innovation scalability is kind of what it, what's in the focus, what you are seeing here. Also, there's at least in two other ways you have written scalability. One is probably more a Portuguese way with scalability and then the team scalability. Okay, talent retention is also a big one. Yeah, feedback from the clients. Yeah. Okay, I leave it with that. Thank you. And you can still keep going. You will get the results afterwards when I send you the slides. But what I think, and what you came up with, like innovation, delivering value, cost, scalability, all of that together is what people often refer to, that this is kind of the times we are living in, which are the VUCA times. So everything around us is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So we cannot really have a long-term plan and just follow that plan through. We have to do something else. Actually, what we need to do is we need to be agile as a company. And this is agile in the literal sense, meaning being flexible, responsive, fast, nimble, adaptive. So all of that. So it's not that companies are asked to, well, use Scrum on all levels. It's really being just general, and again, in the literal sense, agile. And actually, for being agile as a company, there's a lot of stuff out there already. And the stuff that's out there are, for example, these 4 streams that we put together, and they all provide a different angle to the company. So beyond budgeting, it sounds already, it's more like strategic and about budgeting. Open space is more like opening up for innovation for the people. Sociocracy is more looking at the power. And then agile is probably the thing you know best, which is mainly on inspection. I want to take a quick look into some of these streams of, well, we see regarding to time, maybe all of them. And first of all, I want to take a look at beyond budgeting. So basically what beyond budgeting is, it is actually more a management model than it is really about finance, although they also say because finance drives and rules the world, therefore it is management is what you do with finance actually. And so they say it's actually beyond command and control. So what we need is a management model that's more empowered and more adaptive. And there are several things that come together with beyond budgeting. However, there's really something at the core, which is if you think about the budget as it is for companies, then what you're trying to do is to fulfill 3 different purposes by providing just one number. And the 3 different purposes are, on the one hand, you're asking, what is it that we want to achieve? So that's the target. What do we want actually? Then the second one is, what do we believe will happen? That's called the forecast. The third one is, and how do we want to spend the money, or in which buckets do we put the money in? And that's called resource allocation. Now, once you know that these are 3 different purposes, you can also try to separate those out and treat them separately and not putting them together into one number as you typically do when you make a budget for like the upcoming year. Speaking of that, probably everyone who has done the budget for 2020, at latest in March, it all broke together and people found out it was a waste of time to put the budget together. Anyway, so if you separate this out, you can find out that maybe you can come up with a target that's actually relative and not absolute, so that you compare to others. For example, if you think of whatever, selling 100 whatever products over this year, and you sell maybe 80, then this sounds like you are not really made your objective. However, if your competitor has only sold 20 because of the pandemic, maybe it was really good. So a relative target, you can compare yourself with competitors or with like other teams or whatever. So relative allows you to be adaptive. Then in a similar way, a forecast where people normally look like a year in advance. Well, a year in advance, we don't know what's really happening. So what you need is more a rolling forecast where you look at, oh, is it still what we think will happen, or has our mind changed? And the third one is resource allocation, where typically people think in advance, oh, okay, this project will get this amount of money, that project, that amount of money. But now that we have the targets relative, the forecast rolling, we can also do the distribution of the money in the different buckets in a dynamic way. So this is kind of a really a big difference here. I try to go quickly into open space, the other stream that we think will help companies to be more agile is, well, maybe some of you know open space as a facilitation technique. And that is true. However, open space also stands for some principles. The principles is that it's always inviting. So it invites everyone to contribute to what we are doing here. For example, in a company that's using open space as a strategy, you invite everyone to come up with an idea for a new feature, new product, new anything. And it's not going through an idea box and a complicated process where people decide on an idea and then it takes a year or when you hear what will happen. So it's more self-organization through empowerment. People are allowed to bring in their ideas and follow their passion and make those ideas happening. And I give you one example here. Gore, so from the WL Gore, the Gore-Tech company, so the outdoor equipper, they are running the company like that. So everyone is invited at every time to come up with a new idea for a new product feature. And if there are enough people who believe in that idea, it will happen. So no other kind of procedures in place. Now, the third one, which probably sounds a bit weird, is sociocracy. And at the core of sociocracy sits equivalence. Equivalence in many different ways, and I want to point out just mainly two, which is one is shared decision-making by consent, meaning different than consensus, where you are asking for agreement. Consent asks for acceptance, which is, can we tolerate that decision? Can we live with that decision? So it's not kind of, yeah, are we all in favor of it, which would be consensus? And it's also not an autocratic decision, like I'm the boss and therefore I tell you how it works and we go this way. And it's also not democratic by, well, we ask everyone, but in the end we ignore the minority votes. And hopefully thinking of today and the decision tomorrow in the US, may hopefully this time it would be really more the minority votes and not like 4 years ago, where even the minority won because of the weird system here. Anyway, so consent is really, we are talking this through together, but we are looking at what's in our range of tolerance. And if it's not, then we have to say why we think this is risking our joint goal. Now, the other thing with sociocracy is looking at the power structure. The typical power structure or organizational structure that you find in companies is kind of like that. It's a hierarchy that's top down. If you know Agile, at least somewhat, then what you will see here is what's missing. It's the feedback loop. So it's a one-directional thing, top to bottom. Now, if you want to have a feedback loop, you need something like that, where you have what's called in sociocracy double linking, where you have from every level in the hierarchy somebody being elected as a representative for one level higher up in the hierarchy. So you can also look at this like every group, business unit, team, whatever, has kind of two bosses in quotes. So one would be the appointed manager top to bottom, like the classic hierarchy. And the other one would be the elected representative. And those two are together also higher up in the hierarchy and make decisions on consent. So the one who is elected from the bottom up has the same say as the one who has been appointed. And this way you put in a feedback structure in your hierarchy that cannot be ignored. Now, the last thing is Agile, and I assume you know a lot about that, and therefore I would kind of summarize this as, well, you just do inspect and vet, and this way continuously learn. Now that we have gone through these, and maybe you think, okay, that sounds nice, but what does it actually mean for a company? I want to show you a couple of examples here. One example is mainly bringing forward the open space idea, but also some of the others. This is from a client of mine, and it's actually a few years ago, where we decided to come up with a different team structure and more follow the idea that people can choose where they want to work on. This company is an ERP system provider. Well, you heard I'm from Germany. I guess you heard, I'm not sure. And it's not the big blue ERP system provider. It's actually a smaller one, and it's a Swiss company. And so we were looking at the ERP system and looking at, okay, what kind of different products actually make that ERP system happen? And then came up with these different products, then put on these flip charts that you're seeing there, that, well, there's, for example, a product that's called Purchase Plus, and the other one is called Quattro Rule. Don't ask me what it was. It's too long ago. I don't really remember. However, we had about, like, I think 10, 12 different products that make all together that ERP system figured out. So it's not only those two. And we kind of announced it, put it up on like where everyone was passing by close to the entrance, and people could sign up. As you might see here on your left, they first used stickies to put up their initials, and then they started discussing, and only once that was finalized, they kind of put their names in this with a solid marker. Actually, so this was the first time I did that. It's just called self-selecting teams, and it's about 10 years ago. I have done this since then many, many times, also in different ways, also virtually, for example, using Confluence and doing kind of the same thing. However, when I did it the first time, I really feared that on the one hand, there will be one product left nobody wants to work on. And on the other hand, we have teams where only like the strong people are together, and others where we have only the big juniors or so together. And neither happened. People really were, on the one hand, passionate about enough about the whole product, but also responsible enough to talk to each other, figure out what's needed for which product, and they just made it happen without any manager interfering and telling them, oh, you need to work on this and you on that. So this was really more allowing people to work on whatever they wanted to work on. So this is one example. Another example is this one. Not sure if you know this. I guess you have something like this at the university too. And it is a travel and miscellaneous expense report. I know at the moment we are not traveling, but miscellaneous expenses, I think we still have. So at least to my knowledge, everybody hates that. So it's kind of following the rules and procedures when you spend money for your company or institution, and then file it in order to get paid back. But it signals to you, especially in the corporate world, is that, well, people trust you that you're running this whatever $1 million project, but they don't trust you to buy whatever, a decent camera for your remote meetings, or maybe book a decent hotel if you really need to go anywhere. Again, we don't do that. So it's really kind of a signal of mistrust with all those procedures in place. And I want to show you 2 other examples what can be done with that. So this is a company based in Germany called IT Agile. And what they came up with for the expense reports, in this case, really the expense reports only, was just with 3 different principles. And the first principle they came up with was that whenever people are spending money for their travel expenses, then the money they spend, it has to be legal. So it has to be somehow the law captures it. So it's not like any corruption stuff or whatever. That probably makes sense. Then the second thing is that the way they are spending the money has to be sensitive. Well, nobody described or defined what this means. The third thing is, which has also not been defined, is when people are traveling, they should take care for themselves. And when I spoke to the CEO like half a year after they have introduced that, and I asked him, so Henning, how is it going? He was telling me that, well, they figured that about 1/3 of the people is always traveling first class. This is the train, because they are kind of almost only traveling on train because they are more regional. And the other 2/3 are traveling second class. And then before I could even start asking anything, he said, well, it's definitely not top management traveling first class. It's actually the consultants. And the consultants travel first class is something that's accepted by everyone in the company, because everyone says, well, they are on the road so often. And again, this is pre-pandemic, that it's for them more important, or it has different meaning to take care of themselves than for other people who only travel every once in a while. So that makes really a difference here. And to me, what this is the big learning for me is that treating everyone the same doesn't mean to treat everyone equal. And if we have rules and principles in place that are applicable to everyone, then this just means maybe it's not helpful, because it's not treating everyone equal. By the way, there's another company I know of called Miles. This is a Norwegian company. And they have only one principle in place for all of their expenses, no matter if it's travel or anything else, which is whenever you spend money, you have to put it on the intranet. What did you spend it on and how much was it? So it's more that kind of peer pressure. If I spend too much, my colleagues will ask me, so was it really necessary or not? And maybe I have a good explanation why I needed that much money or that high-end camera for what I'm doing right now. So this is just one way how to deal with that. So now I gave you like 2 examples. What do companies do who are more looking at this Bossa Nova stream with beyond budgeting, open space, sociocracy, and Agile here? And actually what we were also finding out, what are the underlying values those companies are really using. And the underlying values are those 4: transparency, self-organization, continuous learning, and constant customer focus. This is what we found by all the companies who, I would say, are really agile company-wide. And if you look into that, what do those values really mean? Then we have this definition with it, which is on the one hand, transparency, where you look at, well, transparency really for all involved in 2 directions by providing information and lowering the barriers to those seeking information. Now, this is interesting because from an agile perspective, sometimes people think transparency means making everything transparent, but that's not helpful. Just thinking of information overload and other stuff, maybe not everything makes sense that everyone knows. However, if I need the information for making, for example, a decision, then it should be a no-brainer that I get this information. Now, looking at the other ones, self-organization, for example, which says use accountable cross-functional teams that select themselves. You have seen about self-selection before, and follow their passion with responsibility. Then we have continuous learning, always learning, contribute to others' learning, get feedback and adapt. And finally, constant customer focus, which says focus wide on every aspect of the company, product and process, structure and strategy, and individual contributions and people. So these are the underlying values that we found for companies that really are serious about company-wide agility. However, what we also found that it shifts the perspective on the organizational chart. What I mean with this is the following. So a typical org chart looks something like this. So you have shareholders, then the board, and then this is represented by the CEO. And then you have on the one hand, kind of the production teams. So the teams who are, well, create the value, the products, the services. And on the other hand, you have the support service teams, and those teams are, for example, HR, finance, and all of these units who are supporting the production team. Now, I mentioned before what we see with companies who are serious about company-wide agility. I mentioned before that for them, the perspective on that org chart has shifted. And it shifted in this direction that, first of all, you see in the center, you have something that's here called the value center. So the cross-functional teams that are actually creating the value. Then if we look to the left, we have the CEO, then it goes to the board, maybe further out to the shareholders. So you could also, if you put this on the side, then maybe it's not so different from what you have seen before, but maybe it is different. Then we have also here the connection to the support service teams. So again, it's like HR, finance, and so on. We have moreover the connection to the customer through a function like the product owner. And note, we really regard this as a function. So it doesn't have to be a person. It could be the whole team. It could be a role that's taken by various people, whatever. So it's unimportant, but there's like a bridge from the value center to the customer. And then what you maybe wonder about is what's that thing on the top? We call this art and spirit. And the art and spirit is kind of the North Star of a company. So what is it? What's our own purpose? What do we really want to achieve? What do we want to get out here? What's driving us really? And this should guide like all of what we are doing. So what kind of products are we building? What kind of services are we offering and all of that? So the key difference to this one, to this org chart is, well, first of all, that the cross-functional teams, the value center is at the core, and it's not like some kind of branch of the org chart, but it's really in the middle, in the center. The other difference, and this is what I see the most often when I talk to my clients, then if we look at, oops, sorry, this is not what I wanted. If we really look at these arrows here everywhere, then very often we find that some arrows are actually missing, or some are really weak, or only in one direction. Like maybe we have only a communication this way, but not that way. And the same could be true here or there or there. And this already is a big helper if you look into how does company-wide agility really work for us, if you want to figure out this. So now I do have another question to you. So if you are getting ready again and go to menti.com, and you found already the website, so menti.com, I have a different code right now, which is 6540413. And here it is that you select what do you think is correct. And this is just like any kind of opinion. So do you think that strategy actually follows the structure which follows the process? Or is it that structure actually follows the process and the strategy? Or do you think it is the process that follows the strategy and this follows the structure? Or maybe you say none of the above, or somewhat all of the above. So I'm asking this because the thing is, if you think of company-wide agility and you want to get started, where do you start actually? You need to start somewhere. And do you start with strategy, with structure, or process, or maybe it all is nonsense? And yeah, so kind of, so we have at the moment, the majority of people thinking the process is following the strategy and this the structure, which is you first need to have a structure in place, and then comes the strategy, and then comes the process. I'm waiting a little bit longer, also because it's so funny to see those balls coming in here. But we have almost a flower in structure follows and process follows. Here it is. And this is at the moment our winner, which is strategy at the moment being the first thing. Let me take a look at this. The thing is that strategy goes first is the thing that has been believed for a long, long time. And probably it's the thing that still some people think this is kind of how it is. And there's some truth in it. It's probably you also heard that, which is kind of the opposite, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So maybe strategy is not so important. However, the thing is, nowadays, people found out that they are all interrelated. So I said already at the beginning, people thought strategy goes first. This is probably 30 years ago or so, where this was the core belief, and also still some people think that this needs to go first, which is kind of, we have to have our vision, mission right, and then everything falls. Others say, well, but if we don't have the structure in place that supports all that, then we don't even need to start. So structure goes first. That was the second belief, which was then published a lot. However, nowadays you can kind of Google for all of these dependencies and you find out that they are really all interdependent. The interesting thing with all three of those is they actually characterize an organization. And this is what we try to also say in here. So for strategy, you often put strategy kind of in the same line as a purpose, and therefore saying kind of it's an organization, whereas for the structure, you say more like has an organization, and for the process, it's being organized. The good news is that because they're all interrelated and you think about getting started with company-wide agility, well, it doesn't really matter where you start. You can start wherever you are or wherever the pain is so high that you really feel like we need to get to do something about that. And hopefully then the other two will follow through. Now, how do you start? That's maybe the other question. And you start by a concept that we call probing. Well, remember we were talking about what are the biggest challenges, and you came up with really a lot of stuff. And I tried to summarize this, that this is actually kind of the VUCA, what you came up with. That's what companies struggling with. So no matter if it's scalability, innovation, or even communication, it's because it's ambiguous, for example, and complex and so on. So you cannot come up with a plan and follow it through. What you can do instead, and that's, I think, the best place to start, is up here on the top. You reflect on your situation. So what is it that we are observing right now? And then maybe you can learn from others and see what they have done. And I provided some examples, like the example from the ERP system provider, or from IT Agile and Miles, how they deal with like expense reports and the rules and regulations here. Then you try and experiment And then you reflect again on your situation. Did something change? Is it better or worse? Are we getting in the right direction of becoming more agile here? And what's of course also super important is publish to your peers, because, for example, if IT Agile would have not talked about this is what we do about expense reports, we wouldn't know. And we really need to learn from one another. So this is the whole thing that we call probing. And a probe, therefore, when you see all that picture, looks like that. So the outcome of your reflection is the background. And is trust cheaper is that example from the expense reports. So for example, if we start reflecting on what do all those rules, regulations around expenses do with us? Well, they are burdensome and people feel like they are not trusted. And then we come up with a hypothesis based on our reflection that maybe such procedures actually cost more than they save, end up demoralizing. And maybe they cost more because they are demoralizing. That's maybe a question. Then you come up with an experiment where you first, of course, should measure if what you came up with in your reflection is really true. Then you start an experiment and then you measure again. And this is kind of like a known scientific way of working. However, it's not so much used in organizational design. And as an experiment, if you are missing this here, as an experiment, you can use and try what IT Agile did, or go the whole way and do what Miles did. So you can just look at what have other people tried. Now, of course, not for every problem you will find a probe that people have done already and tried. So therefore, what probing is really about is that you have to come up with your own experiment, your own probe, your own thing. And it's still important to learn from others and look what others have done, maybe in the same situation, but maybe the situation is slightly different because we are living in this VUCA world. And so you have to come up with your own thing and try this. Now, I want to share one of my favorite examples that I heard about, which is from a bank. And that bank, and this picture is my pure imagination, so it's not the real picture from that bank, but I imagine that this is how they meet. And it's the room for the board, so where the board of directors have their meetings. And but this bank, what those board of directors came up with was that they were reflecting and found that, well, the way we communicate in our board of directors meeting isn't really helpful. It feels like everyone has a hidden agenda or is following whatever kind of goals, but it's not really open and honest. And maybe we need to do anything about that. And then they came up with the hypothesis that maybe if we remove that huge oak table and we meet without a table, things will change. And so they tried it. And were, well, on the one hand, found out that their hypothesis was actually confirmed and validated. So really the communication shifted and it was more open and honest in their board meetings after the table was removed. And on the other hand, what they also found was that the communication to the rest of the organization was also more fluid, so more transparent, more open. So they didn't hide that much anymore. And what I really like about this example, although I don't expect you all being on a board of directors, so maybe you are never getting there because it's not what you plan to do. However, what I really like about that, it's actually a very small change. It's just removing a table and it had a huge effect. So sometimes things, especially in the VUCA world, can be really tiny. It can be a tiny change and make a huge difference. And this is, I think, we really have to look at way more and find those tiny little spots where we can make a difference. And with that, I'm already coming to kind of a wrapping up area. So first of all, this is what you see from Bossa Nova, how it nourishes company-wide agility. It's kind of an overview. And I do have a last question to you on Menti. So get prepared and go to menti.com. And there's a new code, again, a new code, which is 1959674. And I would like to know from you, what's the most important or surprising concept you learned today? And maybe it's nothing, and that's okay too. And that's maybe surprising, but it can be anything. And again, it's free text, as you have done it in the first Menti question already. So go to menti.com and use 1959674 and 4. And I'm curious to hear what you found. Oh, I love that. Of course, I have to love that. Small change has a huge impact. Yeah. And we often ignore it. Often we think, especially in the vocab world, it has to be big. We have to make a huge change here, but maybe not so much. Transparency, that's super important. Yeah. Well, actually, also the removal of the table had to do a lot with transparency. And self-organization, there was maybe the topic with self-organization that self-selecting teams might be one variant of self-organization. Yeah, feedback in the hierarchy. We often think of feedback only something that's related to the process, but actually it is also related to the structure that allows it or not to have that. Right. So we have twice the change with a huge impact. It doesn't see it as the same because of its changes. Again, self-organization is an important thing, which is of course also at the core of Agile. I made a little bit more, tiny bit more. If there's something else that you're coming up with, possibilities, like that. And we have also twice feedback in the hierarchy. Why doesn't it see this as the same? Maybe there's somewhere a blank. Very strange. I don't see it, that it's written in a different way. Nice. Sharing with peers. Oh, this is really important. Yeah. And the probing itself. Okay, you can still get going. Again, I will share the slides also with you so you see what's kind of the outcome of this. And in essence, to me, implementing company-wide agility means that we never really stop trying, learning, changing, and maybe the most important thing is we are never stopping with probing. So, which is maybe a huge thing, because people often talk about an agile transformation, and agile transformation sounds like, well, we are transforming from A to B, so there's an end state. But the end state actually for company-wide agility is always shifting, because we keep learning, we keep changing, trying, probing, and so on. So there is no defined end state unless you say the change, the continuous change is the end state. So thank you so much. And I know we have a lot of time for questions. And so this is how you find me on Twitter, for example. Oh, I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not having it here, but you will find me, I'm sure. So I guess we go back and I stop the screen share and go into the discussion. Thank you.
So, Jutta, thank you very, very much. Amazing talk. I hope the students are excited as I am. And I will start with a kind of tricky question, as we are in a kind of challenging day where the world is watching America.
Oh,
Can
yes.
we apply good ideas or principles from agile methods to politics?
If we can do that, you are asking. I guess we can can really learn something there, and it would be good if we would do that. And actually, my co-author, you probably have seen him on the cover, John Buck, he is actually doing stuff like that in politics, so he would be able to answer this better than I can. However, the thing about having an open mind to continuously learn is definitely something that I personally missed like a great deal in the US, and sorry to say that, also in Brazil. So having this, well, maybe it has to do more with science than with Agile, but it's at the core of Agile as well, this open mind. But well, now that we're talking politics, let me say that. So I'm not sure how much you know about Germany, but our chancellor, she actually studied physics. And so she is a real scientist. And I feel, and being honest, I never voted for her. And I still think she is really the best person we could have in this situation, because she understands what this pandemic does, and that it's just obvious that people will learn as they go. And she never says something like, well, why didn't they tell us in March that this and that helps or doesn't help? Also, she just openly always said, well, we keep learning, and now we know that, and therefore this is what we are doing, and maybe in a month we know something else, and then therefore this is what we are doing. And having this, yeah, again, this open mindset for learning, I think this is super important, and especially at these times. Yes.
Thank. Sorry, it was a kind of a really tricky question, because we do not have the answer. But we need maybe really some transparency, more feedback, continuous improvement could be great for all governments. However, I think we are so far away from it on some countries like ours that it's difficult even to try to explain. There is another question from Andrew. Jutta, the concept of constant learning and changing from Bossa Nova is similar to the ideas from Lean startup and prototyping, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is really similar. And actually, you could also maybe argue, for example, why do we call it company-wide agility and not business agility? Because that would be also along those lines. For me, one difference is that Lean Startup and business agility, they are both looking at the business and the product and the service that we are creating only, which is a big thing, of course. But they are not so much looking at, for example, how are we structured? So the stuff that I said about like the hierarchy, and that we have to build the feedback in there. And also, if you will, it's the same concept of constant learning and changing, but you apply this also, for example, to your structure, and not only to the product you are creating. So this is why we prefer also company-wide agility, because we want to take a holistic view on really the whole company, and not only looking at that part where we are creating a product. And I see you are nodding, Andrew, so I assuming that I answered your question, but please follow up if not.
Yeah, you answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Okay, more questions, comments? Utah Brazilian students are so shy. It's always like this. It's
Why? I don't think so. When I was there, people were not so shy.
yeah, but face to face, maybe less.
Yes, maybe. And of course, I didn't tell here what Bossa Nova means. I need to tell that and explain it in other countries, but I think I don't need to do that here.
Maybe soon. What does that mean? Do you know we have a kind of a very music tendencies in Brazil? They are changing.
Yes.
And now we have a kind of funk, rap, and different styles. We have even our kind of university country It's yes, it's
Mhm.
university country. It's not universal. It's university. It's country for people from university. It's no comments on that. But I know that most of my students like it. But yeah, but again, people, questions, comments.
So, well, from my side, so Bossa Nova wasn't here first for John and myself when we wrote about that and explored the topic. It was more, we had those 4 streams and then played around with it when we thought maybe that thing needs a name, and then the bossa popped up, and then we thought, well, but bossa sounds so bossy, we don't want that, but bossa nova sounds much better. And now I feel like I have become an almost an expert in bossa nova, and I find it's really a good metaphor for what we are doing here, because as you probably know, bossa nova is from the music style, it's a fusion of samba and cool jazz. And in the same way, we feel that it's a fusion that we have created. We have put those different streams together, and therefore it's a synthesis, a fusion in that way for now company-wide agility. Then the other thing, if you directly translate it, I don't need to do that really for you, but that it's a new trend, new wave, that's of course something that we hope to get there. And then the other thing, which is perhaps far-fetched, perhaps not, which is bossa nova as a dance, which is more a general thing, that if you think of people dancing, then typically they influence and are influenced by the music that's played. So if you think of, like, you are in a club and then there's any kind of music played, so it's independent of bossa nova, then people start, well, getting high on the music, and maybe the DJ then thinks, or the band, well, maybe this is too much, and plays a different kind of music. So it's always a kind of almost a dialogue that's happening between the ones where the dancers or the company plus the ecosystem. And that's another thing that we see, that it's, well, no company is an island, and it has to understand that whatever it does, it has an effect like that. And again, it's not only bossa nova, it's just just general what's happening when you're dancing. And actually, in the same way, you are also having an impact on the other people on the dance floor. You all probably know that also. It's kind of an infectious thing, how you dance, if it's carrying over or not, or it's slowing down or not, and so on. And also sometimes it can be getting super aggressive, which is, of course, well, whatever, of course, I don't like that too much, but it can really happen because it's also like a wave that's getting higher and higher. And if the DJ is then not, or the band not quickly playing different music, it's kind of, yeah, getting outside of what you really want. So that's my comment to the bossa nova.
Great comment. I have an additional question. You wrote one of the first book on agile distributed teams. And
Yes.
now that we have this kind of agile distribute and
Yes.
remote teams, what can we do? What are your hints to this new era?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one thing that I really hope is that once the pandemic is over, that people remember how it really is to work remotely. Because one of the problems that I've always experienced is that it was so hard for, and I've written about that, so hard for people who are on one side and they are together and having the same respect, or yeah, same focus and closeness, proximity to the people who are not in the same location. But now that everyone has gone through this experience, how it is to be somewhere else, I hope that people understand better what it's needed to be more inclusive. So that would be really my big hope, that we all learned something about that. The other thing is, actually, it's interesting. I have at the moment with my current client really an interesting discussion here. So we are a team at the moment, only like 2, maybe 3 sites, but a 4th site will come. So 2 in Europe and then 1 in the US. And I'm always, especially if we have problems in aligning and if it's a long-term strategy, I've always been a big fan of having cross-site teams. And I know a lot of people think like, oh, that's not a good idea because, well, people need to be together and so on. Yeah. And I always felt like, well, if we put this other separation between them, they are already separated, and we now also say, and you are team-wise separated, then what's happening is that people are developing other stuff at other sites. So speaking of, for example, conceptual integrity, so you have something happening on one side, these kinds of patterns that we are using, or we are using Quarkus here and Springboard over there, and it's just too difficult to bring it all together and aligning it. But if you have cross-site teams, then it's just, well, people are enforced to work together. And what I found right now, this is kind of easier because everyone is remote anyway. So the only thing that's different between, like, if we would have a cross-Atlantic team, that, well, of course, there's a time difference. But in our case, they're on the East Coast, it's not so bad. So it's not like West Coast in 9 hours. So, yeah.
And thank you again for your answer. And I have another question. When you were talking, I saw that several times you could have mentioned safety. And why I'm saying it, because we had a talk about 2 weeks ago on safety and how it's important to people to be not only comfortable, but safe in the environment.
Yeah.
And what about adding another S to Bossa Nova or something to safety also?
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, safety and especially psychological safety is really an important thing, and which goes together also with trust, I would say. So am I trusted to do the right job, or am I always feared to be controlled? Yes. However, adding another S, I don't think so, because actually what we always had in mind that those 4 streams is not all it. Already when we wrote the book, there's other stuff that's providing a contribution. Lean startup, by the way, is one of those, but also, well, almost everything in the complexity field, like Kinefin, or also Ralph Stacey's work, or human systems dynamics, and whatever. However, what we said, we have the Nova, and also if you remember our kind of logo, it has an arrow going out, which means there is more. And it's not that we say we have the truth here, but it's a good start. And it allows you already to look at the company from really different angles, but be open to other stuff that's out there that helps you to getting there. And so that's why I wouldn't therefore change the name. I think it's still fine, but it's all for me combined in the Nova. There will always be other stuff coming up, and that's fine.
Great, thank you again. Now, João, my TA is so quiet today. You can read the question from Gabriel. João, go ahead.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Gabriel says,
he's so quiet, so he's going to read it.
Yes.
Jutta, a lot of the talks we've had in this class revolve around working with peer as partners, not so much as employee-employer member. At the same time, like you mentioned during the presentation, teams can't really be a democracy. How do you draw the line between these types of relationships? Interesting question.
That's a difficult question, and I'm not sure if I really understand it. So, yeah, peers as partners, that's definitely one thing. However, peers are also embedded in the company. And so there's, however the company is put up, so very often I'm more in larger corporations, and there are like reporting lines or any kinds of structures. But if you want that they are working in an agile way as well, then you have to come up with a way to make that happen, so that there is also a trust between like me and my boss, or me and the peer of my boss, or so that I'm courageous enough to cross the silos, and maybe even this way get in the way that we really live in a cross-functional world here, and not in the siloed world where we have the different business units separated from each other and have a hard time to really create something that's serving our clients. But I'm not sure if this is really meant with the question. So let me see again. How do you draw the line between these types of, well, maybe I did answer. And maybe Gabriel, you have to speak up and ask more if I didn't answer.
Hi.
Hi.
My point was various teams that, sometimes you want to, call out maybe a peer that, hey, maybe we could do this together, or maybe, work harder on something else. And it gets kind of, I don't know if awkward is the right term, but, you have to cross that social line and not come out as being aggressive. So I kind of wondered when you mentioned the democracy, because that's kind of always on my mind when I'm working with, an organized team, because you don't want to be, excluding and aggressive and come out, even if you didn't mean it, you don't want to come out as rude and maybe scare off that person, because surely they add something to the team, or else they wouldn't be there. And yeah, I got it. Thanks. I really understood it better.
Okay, so actually, to maybe just add one sentence here. So I would think this should be kind of also in the team. However, I also know that not always is the trust there to really call someone out, and calling someone out could be also done in a different way. It's more like asking for help, or asking to provide help, or asking if, maybe that's a huge step, but still going into the direction, if the position the person has is really the one the person really feels the most responsible and passionate for. And maybe then again, something like self-selecting teams helps the person to actually provide whatever potential the person can provide, so that it kind of plays together. And I see another question, and I also see the time is passing, but we can take that other question, I guess. Can we?
Okay, maybe the last question. Go ahead,
yeah.
please.
So I see that Andrew asked who is actually responsible for the probing in the organization. And yes, for lean startup, for example, it would be UX designers doing A/B tests and so on. Actually, I don't see this as somebody being responsible for it, because as you remember, like the strategy structure process, as you can start everywhere, the same is true. Everyone can start somewhere. And one easy way of starting, if you think of, well, a huge corporate or so, you could also think of, maybe we get started in our team in the retrospective, and we start in a way that for the actions that we are planning, maybe we also come up with an hypothesis and an idea how we can measure if the actions we came up with really made that difference we thought it may or will make. And this way start getting into this approach of probing. So it can really be everywhere. So I don't see that there will be a chief of probes also, C or chair of probes, COP in a company. It really should be an attitude from everyone being open to that. Actually, interesting enough, I just read this week a survey from McKinsey who said that the companies who dealt the best now with the pandemic actually are the ones who are open to experimenting, which is exactly that thing.
So
Right.
in other
Makes
way,
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for your question. Great question.
probing should be part of the mindset.
Yes, exactly.
Like innovation. Innovation, it's part of, I really enjoyed the example. When a company has the innovation department, there's something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of
So-
like a DevOps team. What's
Yeah.
that? I don't know.
It has to be the culture and in the wall. So
Yeah, it's a smell.
thank you very much. It was an amazing talk. Sorry for the kind of quick introduction that I did inside of a taxi. It was kind of weird, but it worked. But it was a great
fine.
talk.
Thank you so much for having me. And next time I'm coming in person, right?
Really hope so. Really hope so. And yeah, at the end of this mess, let's hope that we are going to travel again and see people. And
Yes,
yeah.
I hope so. Right.
Okay. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for clapping and thanking.